Look at a modern map of the United States. The borders feel permanent, settled. But rewind to the early 1840s, and this picture changes drastically. The entire western half of the continent, from the mountains of Utah to the coast of California, belonged entirely to Mexico. When James K. Polk took the presidency in 1845, he arrived with a single overriding obsession: stretching the American border all the way to the Pacific Ocean. His first move was straightforward. He sent a diplomat to Mexico City, offering $25 million to buy the land outright. The Mexican government told him to leave. Since he couldn't acquire the territory with a checkbook, Polk decided to use the military. He needed a war, and he knew exactly how to start one. The border between Texas and Mexico was actively disputed. Mexico claimed the line was the Nueces River, while the U.S. claimed the Rio Grande, about 150 miles further south. Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor to march his army directly into the middle of that contested strip. It was a deliberate provocation. On April 25, 1846, a Mexican cavalry unit attacked a small American patrol along the Rio Grande, killing 11 soldiers. Back in Washington, Polk seized the moment. He went straight to Congress, declaring that Mexican forces had shed American blood upon American soil, and demanded an immediate declaration of war. A young congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln stood up to challenge the president. He demanded Polk point to the exact spot on a map where this blood was shed, arguing that the American claim to that soil was highly questionable. Congress ignored the young representative. The vote passed easily. The truth of the border dispute was buried, and the invasion was officially underway. Polk launched an assault that was wildly ambitious. He ordered 4 separate invasions to happen simultaneously, sending American forces south from Texas, across the western deserts, down the California coast, and eventually straight into the geographic center of Mexico. The American military overwhelmed Mexican defenses with a new innovation: flying artillery. These were lightweight cannons mounted on fast-moving carriages that could blast an enemy formation and gallop to a new position before return fire could reach them. When the advance stalled at the heavily fortified city of Monterrey, American troops abandoned open street fighting. Instead, they adopted a brutal urban tactic called mouse-holing, blasting their way directly through the shared walls of residential homes to take the city block by block. General Taylor was winning decisive victories, which created a political problem for the president. Fearing that Taylor would use his popularity to run against him for the presidency, Polk stripped the general of most of his troops and handed them to a rival commander. While the U.S. military was systematically dismantling Mexican resistance on the ground, the overall campaign was being actively hindered from Washington by a president terrified of his own general's success. The command went to General Winfield Scott, who executed a massive amphibious landing on the Gulf Coast and began a grueling 200-mile march inland toward Mexico City. As they neared the capital, Scott's men met fierce resistance from an unexpected enemy. They faced the San Patricios, a battalion of Irish Catholic immigrants who had endured brutal treatment in the U.S. Army and defected to fight alongside the Mexicans. The final obstacle was Chapultepec Castle, a fortress housing Mexico's military academy. Here, a cadre of young American officers, including several who would later command the armies of the Civil War, engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat against Mexican cadets, some as young as 13. When the castle finally fell, the American commander coordinated a grim spectacle. At the exact moment the stars and stripes were raised over the fortress, 30 captured members of the San Patricios were dropped from the gallows. By seizing the seat of government, Winfield Scott effectively broke the Mexican state. The map was redrawn, though the achievement rested on a brutal campaign of occupation and the execution of former comrades. With the capital occupied, Polk's ambitions grew. He decided he wanted to absorb the entirety of Mexico and sent a diplomat named Nicholas Trist to secure it. But spending time on the ground changed Trist. He watched the occupied population interact with the soldiers and developed a deep respect for the Mexican people. He realized the sweeping conquest his president wanted was wrong and outright refused to demand the rest of the country. Instead, he sat down and signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. For $15 million, Mexico ceded over 500,000 square miles, including modern-day California, Nevada, and Utah, but the rest of the nation remained independent. When the paperwork reached Washington, a furious Polk fired Trist and withheld his wages, ruining him financially. Still, the terms were extremely favorable, and political pressure forced the president to accept a deal. The administration had engineered a war to conquer a continent, but the final borders of the American West were ultimately drawn by a diplomat actively rebelling against his commander-in-chief. The ink on the treaty was barely dry when the true value of the land was revealed. Just 9 days after the documents were signed, a carpenter reached into a cold stream in newly acquired California and pulled up gold. That discovery would trigger immense wealth, but the war itself carried a devastating toll. 13,000 Americans died during the campaign, the vast majority wiped out by disease rather than combat, and it left another, darker legacy. The junior officers who bled together on the march to Mexico City included men like Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and William Tecumseh Sherman. Polk's war successfully secured a transcontinental empire, pushing the American border over the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. The young officers on those Mexican slopes received a lethal education in amphibious landings and coordinated artillery strikes, the exact tactical foundation they would use to fight one another just 13 years later.